In this episode, I'm talking to David Craig, CEO of Iceotope. Iceotope help their customers become more sustainable by significantly reducing their energy and water consumption, as well as reducing the cost of data center design, build, and operations. Iceotope's technology offers extreme cooling performance whilst isolating and protecting the critical IT from the surrounding environment and atmosphere. David and the team achieved this by delivering game-changing precision liquid cooling solutions that make it easier for companies to achieve their net zero targets. Iceotope's customers are extremely well-known brand names who deploy some of the most innovative and advanced technologies in the world. Hi David, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you again.
Great to be here, Paul. Thank you.
Before we dive into the business and your company background, can you just talk to us about your early life, your home, your education?
Yeah, I'm from Govan in Glasgow. Early life, classic working class family. Govan's not exactly the posh end of Glasgow, so free dinners at school, but a mum and dad that were pretty normal, pretty ordinary people, good, kind, decent sorts, and school-wise, I was okay. Quite smart, didn't work hard. So not a university graduate as a result, but much more interested in music and things like that. So I spent most of my teen years mucking about, playing bass in bands, acting as a roadie for all sorts of stuff. Very, very happily in the punk and the psychobilly scenes and so on. And eventually, though, having met the lady that is my wife of these last 39 years, we wanted to settle down together, and that required something that pays a lot more money than being in punk bands and roadieing. So I got a job, but just a classic, straightforward upbringing of good, kind, pretty decent parents.
There's a few famous names, obviously, that have come from Govan, but while we're talking around music, what's on the wall? I know it, but what's on the wall? But talk to the people who are listening who have the pictures.
So on the wall, Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees, original NME cover. Big fan and a proud ticket owner for one of our gigs this summer. Okay. The other is my original 5,000 run cover of Joy Division Unknown Pleasures. So bought,
great album.
Shot, within days of it coming out, so just well protected and cared for. And the other one there is the original A&M cover of God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols. And I have other artwork in the office. I've got probably the one I'm actually proudest of is I have a sound cloud of Hong Kong Garden by Susie and the Banshees, which Susie autographed for me. So that's
cool.
That's
here. I was in the car the other day. I was listening to Noel Gallagher, big fan of Noel. Noel Gallagher did an interview with Joe Wiley on BBC Sounds, or BBC, and I was listening to it on the BBC Sounds. And had my oldest, who's 7, in the car, and one of his songs was the Pistols. And Lennon likes, as he calls it, rock and roll. And he hadn't heard the Pistols before, and he turned around and he said, "Danny, this is absolutely fantastic." And I'm not sure what to make of that, if that's a good one.
But it's just, never mind the bollocks. It's just one of the best rock and roll albums of all time, and it's just fabulous, So
yeah, it's a bit misunderstood as well, isn't it? So yeah.
And it builds on that. I really loved the New York Dolls and Bowie and stuff like that. I think it builds on that whole kind of platform, that moves forward there. I've always been kind of alternative in musical taste, so never quite been in the mainstream. So I think it's just, it's fabulous music and fabulous album. And
cool. No, good man. Thank you. I could waste a lot of time talking about music and football, so we'll keep this to technology and what we're here to talk around today. So just touch on so how does a guy living in Govan, comes out of school, having been on free school dinners, etc. How does a career in technology begin? What sort of first started to whet the appetite? When did it become a reality for you?
it started with a journey to the job centre the Monday morning I decided to get a job.
Right.
And I'm all spikes and stuff, you know. And there was a job going as a storeman with Burroughs Computers in Livingston, Newtown. And I got interviewed by them that afternoon, and they gave me a phone later on. And I started as a temporary storeman the next morning. And that started my career in technology.
So what year would this have been?
So this would be 1984, 84. So 20 years old, and time to, you know, get on and make a proper living. So I started as a storeman, and I've always had a good brain. I've always asked questions and stuff. I wasn't over interested in, you know, formal education in the sense that it was quite tedious at times, but I've always read a lot and stuff. So I'm not being boastful to suggest that I had a slightly sort of quicker brain than many of my contemporaries in the stores department. And we had a big development engineering group there, and they were constantly struggling to get parts. They were lousy at working with the system, and, you know, if they were working on a next generation of something, they could never get, you know, how to get parts out the stores, all sorts of things. And so I was delivering stationery to the director of engineering, and the Guardian was not there. So I walked into his office and said, a guy called Ian Carradine, Mr. Carradine, you don't know me, my name's Dave Craig. Absolutely, my hair's like, you know, up here.
I can imagine.
You don't know me, my name's Dave Craig. Here's a problem that you've got, and I think I can fix that for you, know how these systems procedures work, etc. So he told me to get out of his office in no uncertain terms, and a couple of days later I got called to a meeting with his sidekick, and, you know, my boss's boss was like, you know, Davy Craig, what have you been up to? Nothing. Admit nothing. So went and saw this guy, and it was kind of like, Carradine really likes your style, tell me more. So they actually took me on, and then about 9 months after that, they asked me, they rather surprised me and said that they were going to break a bit of history, and they wanted their very own purchasing guy, their very own buyer. So they'd gone and negotiated with manufacturing and stuff, and I got taken on as their very first engineering buyer. So I was now in a procurement role. So I was the youngest ever buyer in the history of Burroughs, and the first ever not employed in the procurement department. And so I was in, you know, now in this procurement role for all this early stage development and so on. And they also brought in a guy a guy called John Law, who was just a fabulous, kind and wonderful mentor, just a good guy. And so by 1989, I was the senior technical buyer inside the place. And then IBM headhunted me. So based in Greenock, but in sort of 89, and then somewhere mid 1990, they put together a global procurement group, and I get put into that. So my boss reported straight to Bob Corrigan, who ran the personal computer whole business. So my boss, a guy called Alan Sullivan. Actually, no, there was John Patterson was in the way, but very short line to the very top. And I ended up being the buyer for all the printed circuit boards that the entire PC division used. So everything from Australia, America, Japan, and so on. So I did so much of the early sourcing work that took us into Taiwan, China, and such like. My group brought Foxconn into IBM when Foxconn was a $30 million company, not the kind of $30 billion behemoth that it now is. You know, people like Sim Wong Hu, the founder of Creative Technologies, you know, he's a bit of a legend in the industry, you know, it was our group that brought him into IBM and so on. So it was a really fascinating time. And but I was doing a huge amount of travel to the Far East, and IBM put me through an MBA, which was interesting, having not had a degree before or anything. And so that was useful, and it was a good time as well. That kind of like early 90s, if you had an MBA, they were paying silly money, and everybody was running around. So I get headhunted at the time, and I was keen to not spend 6 months of the year in the Far East all the time. My kids were young, and I had a really seminal moment that in 93, I think it was. I'd been out in the Far East for weeks, and my eldest daughter was just, a year and a bit old. And I'd been away, and you've got that mental image flying home of, my wife and my daughter waiting for me, and it'll be wonderful and marvelous. And she wouldn't come to me. She was hanging on to her mum, and she wouldn't come to me, and that was that really hurt me.
Yeah.
And I said, need to make a change. And of course, at that time, it would either be going to Compaq or Hewlett Packard or something, and just doing the same. So we thought about a real change. We actually applied to go to Australia, thinking, if you're going to change properly. And we put all the stuff in. They said, this will take 2 or 3 years. And in the meantime, an insurance company called Scottish Amicable got in touch and headhunted me to come in and run kind of all the back office services, procurement, all sorts of stuff. And that allowed a much more kind of 9 to 5 type world, and, home with the kids and stuff. So it wasn't massively exciting, to be honest, but, did a lot, and it was a good space to be for that time. And so we agreed to join them, and then the Australians said, critical skills, go and get your medicals. And it's like, oh no, well, so we didn't go, and we stayed with them. And then, so I had, interesting 2 or 3 years with them overall, and, achieved some quite good stuff, particularly when Prudential bought them. There was kind of some good contributions there, but I then get headhunted to come to Yorkshire. I live in Yorkshire now. And I was part of a team that did a turnaround on a refrigeration business, a traditional kind of supermarket refrigeration business. And long and short, it was owned by, a company that put money into it. It just lost £1 million. It had classic bowler-hatted management of a 1950s type. And despite having customers like Marks and Spencers and stuff, it, failed miserably. And we're losing money. So we came in, and long story short on that, in about 3 years, we turned it around into a 4 million profit. Shareholders had been offered £1 million for it in kind of 96, 97, and we sold it for 27 million in 2000. Then started, joined and kind of became the major partner in a procurement consultancy, which we built up, and we sold that to Amy, the construction group. They wanted to try and do better procurement stuff with the civil service and all sorts of stuff. And I wasn't much interested in that, so I decided to not go with it when they bought it. And I was asked to come and join a software company in Scotland called McGlone Software, which was in a bit of a mess. And over the next 6 years, we got from being a thing that had huge losses and a whole pile of debt and a very, very awkward shareholding scenario to being, when I left it in 2008, we'd have, couple of million in the bank, and we'd just done our first enterprise deal to somebody who'd never bought a seat of our software before, which was kind of a big ticket thing. And I was actually going to semi-retire in 2008. We were going to sell McLaren and all sorts of stuff, but so I came out, and then 2008 became 2008, Paul, so the year of the financial crash. So we didn't sell it that year. We did sell it a couple of years later, but it in coming out, it gave me time to do a couple of things. One, we'll talk about later, but we did quite a lot of work around a charity that my family run that year. I also started just helping out some other startups and spin outs and stuff, which I did for a few years. mostly, helping them get going, and me then having taking an equity stake and helping build them and getting financing and so on. So I'd run, so in that time period, I'd got very actively involved in technology through IBM, because one of the great things they did is, if you were a buyer, is you kind of needed to know what your stuff did and how it worked. So I knew a lot of that stuff from the ground up. And, and then in software, having ran the software development teams and so on, so I was kind of number one salesman for the software as well. And, I can't write code, but I know absolutely how to lead teams and get stuff out and push things. So that was useful. So I've always had so through the career, I've always been in and out technology somewhere in there in different ways. And then, to Iceotope, it was, I originally joined as a non-exec director. It was obvious that the business had some challenges, and I actually became executive chairman at first, and then as we saw opportunities, we came into the point where the board asked me to become CEO, because I'd identified how we could drive value in this business and drive it forward, and I've been doing that ever since. And there you go.
And here we are today. I was so hopeful there that you could have given me a seamless link when you've got a refrigeration business in Sheffield. And I'm thinking, refrigeration, cooling system. I can get my next question in, and then he goes somewhere else, and it's a different spiral. Yeah. So you've neatly led me anyway to where we are today. So Iceotope, data centers, the cloud, this game-changing precision liquid cooling solution that you guys have got. Just take some time now to talk around the business, what you guys specifically do, and how you sort of changed what would be deemed, I suppose, with being a traditional way of managing your data center.
Yeah, I absolutely. At the simplest level, what we've done is to develop a technology that allows you to use liquids to take the heat away from your electronics instead of air. Today, most of our data centers on the planet are cooled by blowing fans around the place, blowing air. It's actually very inefficient. It's consuming 3% of the planet's energy and enough water to hydrate 10% of the planet's population. And we need to do more, right? We want to do much more data management, and we want it outside of data centers. We want autonomous vehicles and things. So we need more IT. We need more AI for healthcare, for, service and so on. So it's really important that we get that stuff out there. But basically, we're at a point where we need a greater inflection in the amount of data we process. Mm-hmm. The processors that are being produced now are too hot to be cooled in air.
They are getting too hot. Just expand on that a little bit. What do you mean by they're getting too hot? Why are they getting too hot?
So the microprocessors that sit at the heart of our servers and such like have, for the last 10 or 12 years, have been somewhere around 100 to 150 watts. With the rise of stuff like GPU compute and so on, some of those are 600 and 700 watts. So if you imagine your granny's old sort of like 3-bar electric fire, each of those is, and the big wide ones is a kilowatt, right? But the smaller ones, that's 500 watts. So if you can imagine that coming off a little thing, this size. And the microprocessors are now 250, 300 watts, and we're seeing roadmaps that start to make them, hotter and hotter and hotter. And air really, once you're above 250 watts, it's really struggling badly. So liquids are just thousands of times better at transferring heat than air. But it's all well and good to have a technology, but you also have to have a business model that allows an industry that's spent, $1 trillion and 40 years of value engineering around one way of doing things to make that change. So I think the thing that we've done at Iceotope is to be not doctrinaire about technology, but instead very much to try and understand the problem and then design solutions that solve the problem. Whereas most of what we see in the industry is we've designed a solution. Can we find a problem for it? And I think that's something that kind of separates us. But at the simplest level, we allow us to capture that heat and to do a number of things. One, reduce the energy consumption by about 40% to eliminate the consumption of water. We have a small amount of water used in the circuit, but it's a fraction by comparison to the consumptions of today's technology. We can use a lot less space. We can run much hotter in those chips. We can just keep going and going. But we can also actually create a virtuous cycle around that power use, because the heat that we capture can be used to heat neighborhoods and stuff like that. So we can turn an industry that's currently quite a vicious cycle in a sense of ESG. We can kind of turn that into quite a virtuous cycle, but it's not an overnight thing. You need to take quite a few big players across a few industries with you. But that's been our mission. That's what we're up to doing, is pretty much trying to, deliver that kind of net zero world one server at a time.
So water and liquid and a scientist with electricity, never felt like it was a good combination. Explains we then, again, assume our grannies are sat next to us, and obviously I've spent time with you, so I understand to a degree. I'm not going to pretend I know fully, but I understand to a degree how the technology works. Just explain then for our listeners, not exactly how it works, but generally, what is it that you're solving and how do you do it?
So if you were to look at a high class compute item today, a server, it's in a tin chassis full of holes with fans at the back. And that'll sit in a rack with big fans and stuff blowing through. They call it a hot aisle and a cold aisle because, some's cold air and then the other side of it is hot air. We kind of remove all of that hardware. We don't need that. So we're now a tin box without holes in it. And the compute sits inside, but we're actually using a liquid in there. We're using an oil-based liquid and a very small amount of it. So it's called dielectric. So it doesn't fritz your electronics, but it's got a very, very high ability to transfer heat. And liquids are perfect because they can flow around things. You don't need to make shapes of them, so they can conform nicely to everything. So it means we're able to transfer 100% of the heat that's inside the device. So instead of just blowing air and cooling it down, heating it up, cooling down, heating up, we can actually capture the heat, and then so that you would then transfer to a water loop, but it's like a radiator, like a central heating system.
Got it.
So there's water cycling round, but it's at typically something like 40 Celsius, and we would transferring that heat would maybe take that up by about 5 Celsius, and then all you need to do at the other end is either use that heat purposefully, or if you don't have that use for it, then all you need to do is trim 5 Celsius off, which in Manchester, for example, is very easy to do. You just pretty much expose it to the ambient, and 45 to 40 will be taken care of by the cold, the wet, and the wind that's happening around you to some extent.
But in Arizona?
But in Arizona, even most days of the year, you'll still be able to do that. But in the very hot ones where they're up at, 50 Celsius type stuff, then you use a very tiny amount of energy to trim that 5%. Whereas today, you're taking, 20 degrees Celsius off of 40 odd Celsius constantly in a cycle with air. So just a much narrower band of temperature to operate at, and just not really consuming that. So that takes all of that energy from that cooling process out, but it also takes energy out of the server. The server's fans are no longer present, no longer running, which is about another 10% of energy saving. So it's really, really significant, both from a sustainability, but also a return on capital point of view.
Yeah, 100%. So Dave, so data centers I've been in historically, for example, would be raised floors, freezing cold environments for the very reasons you're explaining, because obviously they heat up, you need to cool them down, etc. Can your technology go some way then to changing these big square blocks into different performance tools?
Yeah, absolutely. Fundamentally, it's actually possible. We could revolutionize the way property and data centers work, because we don't need those raised floors, and we don't need those big aisles, and we don't need the fans, we don't need the cold air. So, we actually deploy our technology into offices and such like it. It could literally live in the cupboard under the stairs. It could live on the rooftop. It could be in multi-story buildings. You could repurpose brownfield factories and such like, without building really expensive real estate, and you could run unbelievably performant, very, very powerful data centers all through. And that has to be the future, actually. They have to be much closer to where the people are and where the fiber is and where the compute load is. So the big, the big data farms that you see have still got their place, but they can be just insanely more efficient. We can fit in about a sixth of the physical floor space, and so on. So there's a guy called Enrique Cecchi with Gartner who's got a phrase I like, which is the data center is no longer the center of our data, and we can do compute in many places. So we move from being a technology that just deals with a problem to actually creating a very much an enabling platform that says, hey, you can have really low latency, you can have your compute where you want it. It's silent because there's no fans. So, so from a competitive advantage point of view, your compute will run faster, you'll service it less often, it's less expensive to run, and you can go faster. What's not to like? So, there's a very significant enabling aspect to what it does to allow people to have distinct competitive advantage. They just have to get past the, quote unquote, the IT bigot that likes to keep things the way they've always been.
Yeah, and you've spoken to me in the past around how then you could manage that particular building or property, and it doesn't have to be the whole thing's being blasted of air con at X degree. Absolutely. You could have a part of the building being focused on because it's working harder and turn areas down, and that whole building management. Now, clearly you're going to say positive things, but just talk to us around how you compare your technology to either legacy or technologies that exist, or how we've cooled particular areas, etc. Just how would you compare you guys to it?
Well, we're fundamentally doing the same job, if you like. We're dealing with that problem of heat, but it's a much simpler mechanism. There's almost no moving parts, whereas everything today is mechanical with a huge number of moving parts and a lot of space. So, a very significant proportion of the physical mass of a data center is actually not taken up by the compute, but by all the infrastructure that deals with the compute and its cooling. So we can kind of take that stuff out of the way. The challenge, of course, is for everybody is you've now got computers with liquid around them rather than air. And data centers are fundamentally an exercise in risk management. You don't want to be the data center that forgot, that failed to run the payroll on the last Friday of the month or whatever, So with anything new like that, people, well, how does it work with today? How do I get from here to there? How safe is it? How long will it last in the long term? Will I be able to do that? Do my partners support it? Does my servicing vendor support it? Does my IT vendor support it? So there's quite a lot of levers to kind of pull and boxes to tick, which is why we've done a huge amount of strategic work with Intel, with AMD, with people like HPE, Lenovo, Dell, and so on. In the background, we've done huge amounts of work with them. And, for example, we were actually at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago, right, on the Intel stand, supported and very much validated there by Intel. So we were right at the core of their telco offerings and such like. And we've built really strong relationships there. So we're kind of, and that's why I say I think it's always a function of business model as well. We've made sure our technology is scalable. We've made sure it's serviceable. We've made sure that there are global supply chains, that there are, global participants who warn and who, tick all the kind of boxes, so that if you're that CTO who's nervously looking at his board saying, I'd like to do things differently, we've given you that kind of, 99% confidence level that you can get to, that we can make it work for you. And all you need to do then is that leap of faith into saying, I'm going to do something differently. And an intelligent CTO, CFO, when they really sit down and really think about the return that this generates, it becomes very, very, very significant. If they get stuck in the world of, I can just buy one more rack and stick it into my data center, they're missing the point.
To get bogged down in the how, they're not going to get to where you need to get to. Whereas actually something that will now come on to when you consider sort of net zero as well, and ESG and sustainability impacts, and how you can help improve and enhance that for your customers, then actually becomes a different proposition. So go on, we'll lead into that net zero ESG conversation. It's a big thing for you. It's a big thing, obviously, for the company. How real is your technology to helping your customers achieve that net zero, that sustainability positive kind of impact?
So there's a number of ways in which we can do that. So the first thing is that significant reduction in energy and water is of itself, huge. We could be taking half a gigaton of carbon out of the annual atmosphere by using much smarter technologies. But it also allows us to trim our supply chains. The servers that we use, we can buy fewer of them and make them last longer. They can be smaller. They can have less componentry, which is less inventory movement, less cash tied up in inventory movement. So, you can go beyond those straightforward kind of environmental benefits. Say, well, let's have a more silicon-based server, fewer precious metals. Let's have, more sustainable design, more sustainable application. And then as we use technologies like AI and we want them out in our built environment, we kind of have to do that very energy efficiently from day one, or we'll blast the doors off at the other end, making a mess of it. So in summary, I think one thing, compute is valuable and it's a good thing to use resource for. But, using 40% of the energy that you consume, just cooling it down, is nuts. It's not sustainable. And then being limited in how hard you stress that compute because it throttles in air. We don't have that. We take compute to its maximum and keep it there. So you can have, much, much better impact on the type of compute you use, how much you buy, how long it lasts, and so on. Better enhanced supply chains. And when you start to really build up the kind of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 stuff for the GHG, the greenhouse gas protocols, it has a very, very, very material impact. But it's part of the solution. People need clean energy, but repurposing heat, things like that, again, wow, you start to get into that place where we consume, we generate energy once, but we do 2, 3, 4, 5 things with it, which is highly beneficial. So I'm not a tree hugger, I'm not Extinction Rebellion, any of those things, but I absolutely do want my children and their children to live on the one planet we've got and to be smart about it. And one of the reasons I'm not aligned to the Extinction Rebellions and such like is I think that's classically middle class, a rich kid approach. We'll all stop. 5 billion people on this planet live in poverty. I think we have an obligation to allow them to become middle class, to have, travel and food and education and all of those. I think it's really important. So the whole just stop everything and we'll get off. Let's try and find solutions to it. How Western focused is that? These people would be horrified to think of themselves that way, but I see that almost like colonialism. We'll just drag all the resources and skills over to here and benefit from it, and to hang with the rest of you. So I believe they're very well-intentioned people, but actually their solutions don't achieve enough for us. But they perhaps get a place in waking people up to the fact that we have to do better. Nobody should debate that the climate is changing. It doesn't matter if it's man-made or not. We should just try and look after things better.
And evolve with it and react.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd like to touch on bringing investment into the company. You've led on and been part of fundraising rounds into the business, multiple of. Touch on those for me in terms of either simplistically why you raised capital, to who you brought in and why those people were important, and just that sort of fundraising journey and your timings and those different pressure points that you faced along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I came into the business, it already had a Series A with two really, really good patient capital investors, one Aster Capital from Paris and the other one Ombu from London. But it was fair to say the business had not really delivered on what had been sold to that. So it was in a bit of a difficult place where it was burning cash, didn't have a solution that worked properly, and had investors who were. It was also fair to say the board was not at peace with itself. There were some early investors and new, more corporate investors, and nobody was doing anything bad, but they just didn't see the world the same way. So there was conflict there. So first thing I had to do was make sure we tidied the board up. So we had to get focused on those kind of corporate investors who wanted to continue invest. So that meant we had to have, difficult, fair and appropriate conversations with the early investors, and we had to resolve with them, which was done, and they were all properly dealt with there. But that allowed us to have a simplified investment structure and a simplified board. With the cash that was left, it was obvious, let's go and do something. Let's actually prove that this stuff works and get some early customers and so on. And that's what we did. And then actually ran the business on loans from those investors for a couple of years, which were convertible. So, it would be a very difficult place for the business to be able to, price itself at that point in time. It clearly destroyed value, not added it through that period. So it made sense to do convertible loans. And then a couple of years in, we were ready to go to the market and raise some more money. So we raised another 6 million with those two investors converting at a discount, but putting more in. And we also brought in then an investor called Edwards Investments, which is a family office. And, family offices have their pros and cons. I think, the thing about it there is, one, they had a good approach to patient capital.
Okay.
They were prepared to, stay with the business, continue to invest. So that's worked pretty well. I think
that is
overall
important for this type of business as well. This is
absolutely important.
I'm not pretending this is technology of tomorrow, but this certainly isn't, as you've already explained, the education process to your customers. That shift in whether it's behavioural or operational in terms of what we need to do from a global climate perspective, as well as the commercial benefits that you can deliver. And then you're putting in, a different technology that's currently existing. This isn't we'll invest today and in 2 years' time we'll double our money and away we go. Although obviously that's part of the sales pitch. But this is about backing the technology, what it stands for, you, the management team, and then delivering that over a longer period of time. So that patient capital is important.
It is, and that's been very much where we've gone. So those guys continue to support us through another couple of rounds. We increased the valuation every time through there. So that, by late 2020, we'd made our minds up that it was time to go out and do that proper Series B.
Okay.
And with enough traction in, key customers, etc. And I'm afraid I'm not allowed to name, but two of the biggest cloud giants on the planet, other key companies that were out there. So we'd established good traction. So we decided there that what we would do is get a truly global round. We wanted people from every corner of the planet. We went out originally to raise 20 million and ended up raising 30, which was, and we could have raised more. And we wanted to bring in a real strategic investor as well. So that's not an easy ask. So, hundreds of presentations, lots of people, etc. to talk to. But we got an amazing lead investor from Singapore called ABC Impact. They're part of the Temasek family. So they're very, the impact tells you they're very ESG driven. So we aligned very strongly with them and then with us. So they took lead, but we were also able to bring in British Patient Capital.
Yep.
So that's kind of 2 sovereign wealth funds in one round. That's no mean feat. We Northern Gritstone joined, so that's Jimmy Neal's outfit that's focused on the north of England.
Yep.
Sustainable Development Capital Limited from London. So Jonathan Maxwell there, that's a FTSE 250, £2.5 billion fund. So they not only invested equity, but also made a facility available that we could use for customers to be able to deploy stuff and, go off in easy monthly payments. So that helps the war chest massively. And the strategic that came to us, from the US was that they're actually a British company ultimately at the top of the group, but very much a US driven side was a company called Envent, who are a kind of $3.5 billion player in the industry. And they add significantly to our ability to scale, because they have 17 factories worldwide. So somebody said, where would I get this stuff made? Well, either we can license it to you and you can make it, or if you want us to look after that, we can have stuff made in all of these factories. And they make a lot of the equipment that's very complementary to the piece that we do. We do this heat capture, but they deal with that kind of heat dissipation inside of it. So that's given us, a real big brother in the industry and really solid quality capability to operate and scale across the planet. And again, really strong patient capital throughout, and that was very, very important to what we did.
And does that help validate when you're then talking to potential customers that you can say, look, we've got these people on the shareholder list, whether it's the names or the fact that you brought investment in to say, look, we're credible. This is right. This is where this market, this is where the shift of behaviour is going. Believe us.
Yeah, it's all of the above, Paul. I think being able to recognise the quality of those, because you'll see people that've got an investment round, but it's from the Mickey Mouse Co. or the obvious one over there or whatever else. Being able to get something on that scale with those kinds of partners who let's be honest, their inboxes are full of hundreds of really great opportunities. So to be the one that gets through there, that gets through all those investment committees, every one of those was a 2 investment committee journey kind of thing, so these were not easy to do. So I think that gives us some kudos. It recognises that we've got a management team, that we've got traction, that we've got defensible IP and all of that kind of stuff, because the diligence that sits behind these things is non-trivial. It felt like acquisition diligence. So you have to have a bit of heft behind you. Just going up, and I've got an idea, can I have a lot of money, please, is not really the answer to that. So we had to do our homework. We had to be really detailed. We had to be, really thoughtful in the plan and really thoughtful in the investment memorandum and stuff that went with it. And we demonstrated that we had a good board, that we had a good team, and that we had good technology. And we also had, incredible reference customers. I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to name, but an enormous cloud giant, a silicon giant, and a compute giant were all part of that. So, it's that classic kind of thing, the overnight success that did 10 years hard work in the clubs and built a fan base kind of thing to get there,
Yeah, to give it a musical sort of, there's 500 concerts that have gone into that one show that you happen to see us and yourself there, all right, those guys, or rehearsals. I like that. Coming towards the end now, David, I think it's actually quite important for me as well, having had a conversation with you in the past, for you to have the opportunity to talk around some of the amazing things that you've done from a charitable perspective. I won't describe them because I won't do it justice. Will you just talk around what you and your family have done?
Yeah, so we, I do genuinely believe that I am my brother's keeper and that we should make the world a better place. And back in 1998, members of our family had a holiday in Kenya. It's a very Scottish story. The Nairobi embassy bombing had happened, so the prices over there had crashed. So it was kind of like, 300 quid full board, I'm having it. What about the terrorists? We don't care. So whilst there, there's all white beaches, palm trees, all that kind of stuff, lovely. And found a village called Utangi outside Mombasa, and it's a squatter settlement. Thousands of people there, and just loads of kids with no education whatsoever, and just heartbreaking poverty. Just unbelievably poor environment. Just houses that get washed away in the monsoons every year. People regularly dying of malaria, people really starving, and one set of clothes would be a big achievement in ownership. And there was a school there already that we found. It was set up by some lovely kind of Baptist missionaries from Germany, and we, how much does it cost to help a kid? So $450 a month at the time was the reality. So we started right away educating some kids, and then we told friends and so on. Before we knew it, we had 100 odd kids being educated, and Gordon Brown bought in the kind of gift aid type stuff, and it made sense then to become a charity, so that the tax that people could educate that few more kids. And then, long story short, we ended up deciding to build our own school building, and so on. And how do you do that? Well, we'd never built one before, so I would class them as a series of, whether people believe in the supernatural or not, but I believe a number of miracles happened where doors opened and people made themselves available to us, and wonderful things went on. And when we set the charity up, one of the things that we did as a fundamental was no paid officers. So nobody gets a salary out of this thing other than our teachers and our cooks and our security guards and such like in Africa. So we're an employer in the village, but there are no 150 grand CEOs or any of those things. Every penny we've raised through volunteerism and so on. And over the years we've been able to build an orphanage, because AIDS was a huge issue. And lots of kids were being born with AIDS, but also parents were dying. Whilst there were antiretroviral drugs available, there was a huge amount of stigma related to HIV and AIDS, and people wouldn't present themselves to receive the medical benefits that they could at that time. So it was a very difficult time. Yeah. And we built up a very significant primary school. We've just become also a first stage secondary, and we have the orphanage there. So over the years, the 25 years or so, we've now educated about 21,000 kids.
It's incredible, though. It's absolutely incredible.
So, and some of our teachers now are some of the first kids we educated, and so on. Right. And we've managed to get a few off to university and things. And bearing in mind, these are the poorest of the poor, and very often with illiterate parents and all sorts of things, they don't have the best of backgrounds, and yet we've been able to get a lot of these kids right up through quality education, and it changes lives. We've got one who's one of our early kids who's now working for the Wellcome Trust. We've got guys that we've got kids that have achieved amazing things, and it is that teach a man how to fish principle. But I think one of the other things we've tried to do is there's 2 points in which we've kind of imposed, if you like, Western values on them, and we've been very careful not to do too much of that. But one was, we absolutely insisted that we were educating girls, and we were educating them 50-50. So we which is kind of countercultural down there. So we've absolutely focused on educating girls as well. And the other thing that we did, which was quite funny, is we absolutely refused point blank to allow corporal punishment. And it's really funny being berated by parents and asked, "Will you please beat my child?" And it's like, actually, no. We absolutely won't. I will not beat your child, and nor will the teachers. So that's the two kind of, if you like, you know, the things that we've imposed culturally. But outside of that, we've run very much inside the education system of Kenya, and we've tried to allow these kids to grow and develop, regardless of religion, regardless of tribe, regardless of anything. The only requirement for access to the school is that they're poor. And
I remember you first telling me about it. Well, probably one of the first times that we met, and I was sort of speechless and, you know, blown away. And you should be massively proud, and you and your family have done an amazing job. And you know, it's not bad from a boy from Govan there, is it, to be able to say, I've done this, and you've provided a legacy there, David. It's fantastic.
No, it's been a great thing to be involved in. It would be utterly remiss of me not to mention, though, that, you know, my mother-in-law and my wife have been the absolute heart and soul of that. You know, they have, you know, put incredible amounts of labour of love into this, and I love that. You know, my wife, I think she's got 1 O grade. You know, had a YOP scheme from school type thing, and worked in a shoe shop. And, you know, I actually, I mean, she ended up managing one of the biggest shoe shops in Princes Street in Edinburgh by the time she was like 19. But then motherhood came, and she became a full-time mum. And, you know, she's run, if you think of the charity as a business, you know, she's running a business that has educated 21,000 kids. She's doing it. You know, she's at the heart of sitting there doing the spreadsheets and all the other stuff that sits at the core of it, running banking and things. And it's incredible to see. And, you know, she's a girl born in East Kilbride, but family were in the Gorbals and such like. So I just incredible admiration for, you know, her and her mother, who's been, you know, a really important figure and figurehead in what we've done there. And
so if anybody wanting to just check it out, have a look, David, go on.
Educatethekids.com. Really simple. Check it out, and, you know, £11.50 a month educates a child and feeds that child. Importantly, the impact we've been able to make by running a feeding program. You know, we've seen kids faint with hunger in the playground, and we've made sure that stops. So we're unbelievably grateful to the hundreds and hundreds of people who've been incredible sponsors and friends to us over the years, because they've made a difference.
We'll make sure we give it a plug as well. So thank you for that. And I do genuinely believe that was, you know, it's worth spending some time to give you that platform, because what you and your family have done is remarkable. Right, last question. You've done the hard bit now. It's actually 2 questions, I suppose. Be interested to see what your answer to the first question is. But who's your icon? That could be any walk of life, business, music, maybe. And then what would you say to young David when he turned up to the job centre that first time, the Monday after he'd finished school, or whatever it was when you explained, knowing what you know now, kind of thing. So your icon in life, and young Gobby David from Govan.
Okay. You know, there's many wonderful, inspirational people out there, but I'm going to revert and talk about my dad. To be honest, an ordinary man with an extraordinary mind, and he said a couple of things to me that probably help, you know, answer the latter one that always struck with me. And one was, you know, never worry about making a mistake, son. That's why they put rubbers on the end of pencils, or erasers, if there's any Americans listening. Okay, nice. And the other thing he said to me was, never find yourself being 60 with the rain running down the back of your neck saying, if only. And it was just, you know, grab opportunities, take them. It doesn't matter what they are, right? If you're a plumber, be the best plumber. If you're a brickie, be the best brickie. If you're a computer genius, be the best computer genius. And it was just never look back in your life saying, I wish I had, and I wish I had that, and all sorts of stuff. So sitting here now and saying, what would 16-year-old me say about me now? Probably, I wish you'd, stuck in at the music more and been a rock star instead of, doing business or any of those things. But I regret nothing. I regret absolutely nothing. I've been blessed to have an amazing marriage, to have, kids that I'm incredibly proud of, to have worked with amazing people. So am I Elon Musk? No. But I don't care. So I live in Ilkley now, which is unbelievably middle class. I'm going to embarrass my eldest daughter because never in the history of the entirety of our lives had these words ever been held before. But when she was about 15 or something, and in her stroppy teenage mode, she was running around the kitchen one morning, huffing, slamming doors, and it's kind of like, "What's up with you? There's nothing for lunch." And I'm looking, and there's a fridge full of stuff, and it's like, "What about this?" And it's like, "Is a brie and cranberry bagel too much to ask for, Dad?" Well, nobody in the entirety of our family histories, my wife and I, ever had said those words. So we've been blessed to live, a pleasantly middle class life, and I think hopefully through both my business life, I think I've tried to, be an honest and decent person through that, and to build teams and reward people and return funds to investors, and to do value for customers, but equally on the charity and other sides. So all in all, I hope 16-year-old me would look ahead and say, aye, not bad.
He'd probably look at you and think, I don't understand where that person's come from, but that's the journey of life, isn't it, in terms of where you are.
Saying, who's this old square,
Yeah, and then I'm smiling because before we started, I described you as not being Elon Musk, but that was more in the context of me not being Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
So when you said that, I thought, oh no, I hope it didn't offend. So it was more my own inadequacies as a podcast host rather than...
No offence whatsoever. But...
David, look, thank you. Genuinely fascinating story. One that is needed time to be able to be discussed in terms of your journey, and then as people have probably listened and got towards the end of this, realise that not only is the business going to go on to absolutely mega things, but you as an individual are fantastic and a really impressive individual. So thank you very much for joining us on the Found and Cheap podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
This content is issued by Zeus Capital Limited, which is authorised and regulated in the United Kingdom by the Financial Conduct Authority for designated investment business, and is a member firm of the London Stock Exchange. Nothing in this podcast should be viewed as investment advice. Listeners should consult an investment professional before making any decisions regarding topics mentioned in this podcast. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of Zeus.